Turn your love of babies and bellies into cash. If you love babies and bellies and want to provide care and support to families, then Bibo Mia's webinar is the right place for you. Get answers to those burning questions like how to be the voice you wish you had at your birth and how babies and families can be supported by doulas. Learn all about the different kinds of doulas. You can work in fertility, pregnancy, birth, postpartum, or just enjoy working with those squishy babies. Supporting families by becoming a birth worker, aka doula, is perhaps an option that hasn't even crossed your mind, and that's why we want you to join this webinar. You can have great earning potential while doing something you love. Bibo Mia is the one-stop shop for education, community, and mentorship. Reserve your spot today at bibomia.com/free webinar.
You are tuned into the VBAC Link podcast with Meagan Heaton, who is a longtime doula and VBAC mom herself, here to help you get inspired for birth after having had a C-section. Along with this podcast, the VBAC Link offers blogs, resources, and a comprehensive VBAC course for both parents preparing for birth and doulas wanting to take their VBAC education to the next level. Be sure to follow Meagan and her team on all social media platforms for even more. Although these podcast episodes are VBAC specific, it is encouraged for all expectant moms to listen and educate themselves on how to avoid a C-section from the get-go. The purpose of this podcast is to educate and inform. It is not meant to replace advice from any other qualified medical professional. Here is your host, Meagan.
Hello. This is Meagan with the VBAC Link, and we have an episode today to bring to you all about preparing and processing and so many other things. So this is something that a lot of people will write us about in like our Instagram and our email box. How do I process my previous births? How do I process what I'm going into? And how do I prepare for birth when I've never even given birth? Now, I want to just note on that right there, that just because you've had a cesarean does not mean you have given birth. That is just simply not true. So if that is in your headspace, I want you to crinkle it all up and throw it away. You have given birth. You just haven't maybe labored, because I know for me, like I hadn't labored. I hadn't progressed. I hadn't dilated. But, that left me a question, could I dilate? Especially when I had a provider telling me I couldn't. And so I'm excited today to bring Eyla on, and she is going to talk all about the wonderful things that she does. Eyla is a holistic birth guide, doula, trainer, childbirth educator, lactation counselor, health freedom advocate, and mother. Wow, that is a lot just right there. Her work is dedicated to offering guidance that supports women and men in the process that is a return to their deepest knowing about birth, individual sovereignty, and the body's innate intelligence. Wow. A conscious birth building a conscious world. Like, did that just give you chills? Because that gave me chills. Eyla, thank you so much for being here with us today and taking the time out of your very busy life where you do a whole bunch of things. And in fact, you even mentioned in the beginning that you homeschool. Like, what do you not do? What do you not do? Seriously, thank you so much. Normally we read a review, but we're actually just going to get right into it. I want to know more about what led you into doing what you do today, all the many things.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here. Yeah, so what led me to this? I actually was a birth photographer for many years before I started holding space as a birth doula and before I became a childbirth educator. And so I've been in the birth space for quite a long time. And what I started noticing as a photographer, kind of like a fly on the wall, was how different births were unfolding for women in different environments and how her birth team would also influence the energy field of the birth, and so I started taking note of all these factors. And, I was a part of a few transfers, meaning from a birth center to a hospital, or I was part of a woman's journey when she would, decide not to go to the hospital and actually just work with a midwife and do a home birth. So I started noticing all of these nuances, and I really wanted to get more involved and offer guidance. And so I've done various trainings, for myself and carved out what is now this path that I'm on of offering support as a holistic birth guide, and holistic really means like all encompassing. So whatever journey you're on, whatever part of your journey you're on, I'm going to meet you there, and there is no right way to do things. And that's really, really what I've learned over the last decade is like, there is no right or wrong. It's simply what is in alignment with you. That's what matters at the end of the day.
I love that. And it's so important to touch on that because I feel like in today's society, we put so much emphasis on right, wrong, fail, success.
Right.
And it's so hard to feel that you failed. It's so hard to even be labeled like on a medical record that you failed or that you didn't do this. And I know for me, when I was reviewing my previous cesarean op reports, it triggered me. And I knew I was a doula at that point. I knew I didn't fail, but seeing the word fail was so hard. So I love that you're like, I meet you wherever you are, like, and you didn't fail. And yeah, I just love that. I love that so much.
Yeah. Like the litmus test for a successful birth, if we want to look at it, if we want to use the word successful, is like how you feel postpartum, right? Even if a woman has had a quote unquote ideal birth and there is a lot of kind of like sludge that she's working through postpartum, that's indicative to me that there was something about the birth that was not resonant.
Right. Yeah.
And so that for me is like, like I said, it's the litmus test. Like, what is happening for you postpartum? Are you having triggers when you're looking at your report? Are you feeling like you're still ruminating about something that occurred or something that someone said? Like, there's always something to process, and even women who've, had an epidural, everything went smoothly and, no bumps in the road, no obvious bumps in the road. She might be having a lot of anxiety postpartum and she's not really sure why, because everything went fine and the baby's alive and healthy and she's alive and healthy. And then when you start to dig in, you realize like, she maybe didn't do things a certain way that she thought she wanted to. And maybe there was someone in the room who was not treating her well, but she just kind of ignored it and betrayed herself and told herself that it went fine, So
yes, right there.
Our postpartum state is really indicative of how things shook out during the birth. And at face value, it might not seem like, anything was wrong. But when we start to dig, there might be things that we just need to unbraid. And it's not right or wrong. But there is an unbraiding process and an opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I love that you kind of pointed that out because sometimes like I will have clients where they tell me their past birth experience and I'm like, wow, it like sounds so amazing. Like it sounds like your ideal, quote unquote, ideal birth. And they're like, yeah, but this, right? And I'm like, okay, like, and it might not have even been something that happened, but it was something someone said. And it's so crazy how we look back and you're like, yeah, like it totally did happen. Like, every way that you would want it to happen. But like you said, like there may be something that didn't happen the exact way they wanted, or someone said something and we hold on to those things. I know for me, I held on to something. I mean, no, my birth didn't go the second birth didn't go the way I wanted it. It didn't. But at the same time, I was getting some things in that birth that I did desire, but something that was said to me held on for a long time. And sometimes it's those little things and it's hard to recognize them. So how can we go, especially if we have this quote unquote birth, but how can we go back and realize what it may be that is triggering us or bringing us into this space of even confusion of why are we feeling this way?
Well, I think it's first important to recognize that we can't really do this in a vacuum. So if a woman's trying to process her birth on her own, it's difficult. It's helpful to have someone that can reflect back to you what you're saying, right? They can just reflect back what they're hearing. Yes. And also being witnessed by someone is really helpful to express. It helps us in expressing, and we feel safe in expressing. So you want to find someone that you feel safe talking to, right? Whether it's a good friend, maybe they don't know anything about birth, or it's someone who assists with birth processing. That's something that I do. I do one-on-one sessions. Even if it's a birth from 15 years ago, I have clients who birthed 15 years ago, and they're like, I'm just now realizing that things didn't go down the way that, in a way that felt good for me, So what that can look like is just walking through, how did the labor begin, talking a little bit about the pregnancy, kind of reflecting on the dynamic between the woman and her partner at the time. And then, looking at, when did we arrive at our birthplace? What happened? Who was there? What were the faces that you were, experiencing? What were the things that were being said? What did you plan for? What went differently? And after kind of looking at the big picture, going back and saying like, well, let's look at what purpose and role each of those things played in our growth. And so it's an alchemy process that we go through. Right. It's kind of like your wounds become your gifts. So how do we look at everything that shook out and how do we spin that into gold? And it's not negating that things were painful or that things were, deeply wounding on an emotional level. We want to acknowledge that, but we want to say like, how do we alchemize that? Otherwise, you're just circling the drain for years and years. And I know women in their 60s who still talk about how horrible their birth was and how they would never do it again and how, and it's like, wow, do you really want to feel that way, for the rest of your life? And so that's why I tell people in preparation for birth, really educate yourself and really, it's never going to look exactly how you want it to, but you can get pretty close based on how well you prepare and how flexible you become. Right? Because making a birth plan is not all of it. It's how flexible are you with change?
Yes.
And so if you have those two components, your birth is going to unfold the way that it should, and you're going to be in deep acceptance. But if you just walk into it and say, well, I'm just going to show up at my birthplace, the midwife's going to take care of it because midwives are into natural things and they'll just do all the natural things. And I don't need to think about it. Right. So we kind of dig our head in the sand. And that's often when things don't go as planned and they don't turn out how you want them to. So I would say getting into a space with someone who can reflect back to you, what you experienced. And sometimes just speaking it out loud is all you need to do. And it's helpful if you know someone who has an understanding of physiological birth so that they can say oh yeah, sometimes when you get an epidural, it can slow down the baby's heart rate. And that's why you probably heard a deceleration in the heart rate. And then that's, often what can lead to a C-section is the deceleration. And then the woman, it clicks for her and says, oh, that's what it was. There was nothing wrong with me or the baby.
Yes.
It was the epidural and it's okay. And now I know. And then that just kind of unlocks and she can move on,
Yeah. And I think sometimes that can be hard because I've heard so many people say epidurals don't cause C-sections. And I don't want to say that is false. I don't want to say that's true. Epidurals don't necessarily cause C-sections, but there are things that happen sometimes after an epidural takes place that
there are symptoms of the epidural that can cause a C-section. It's not A plus B equals C. It's no, just sometimes A and B together can go to C, they can go to D, they can go into different, and you have to understand that it's a possibility always, but it doesn't necessarily mean it will cause the C-section, but it is possible.
It is possible. Yeah. And another thing that stood out to me just now, a lot of things, but another thing that you just said was we were talking about birth plans, right? And so many of my clients, and maybe you have seen this through your experience through birth, but so many of my clients, they want these birth plans. And I'm not going to tell you that a birth plan is bad, but sometimes I feel when we have a birth plan in place, we hold ourselves to these high expectations and we have to check this birth plan off. But when you're saying is how flexible are you with change? I want to encourage all of you listening, whether you have had 1, 2, 3, however many cesareans, or maybe you're a first-time mom listening and you're wanting to learn how to avoid cesarean and how things that can pan out. If we can't be flexible in childbirth, that can be really hard on us and it can impact us because childbirth doesn't happen exactly the same way every time. Even my third kid, right? Totally different. And so I love that you said, how flexible are you with change? And is there anything that you would suggest or any tips that you could give for learning how to be flexible? Because we want what we want. We desire what we desire. We have this vision, and we want this vision to pan out exactly how we want it to. And that is no shame. We are human beings, right? Like, I go to Target, I see that shirt, I want that shirt, and I'm going to do what I want to get that shirt. And we go into birth and we have this birth plan, and it's like this path, and this is what we want. And we're here to get what we want. And sometimes it doesn't happen. So is there any way that you could give us any ideas of how to learn how to be flexible while also not getting all your desires and shoving them to the side saying, oh, well, I have to be flexible because birth doesn't pan out? Does that make sense?
Totally. I mean, I think that the latter, you just said, like, oh, I have to just whatever comes, you know, like for me, there's a level of self-betrayal there because you're not asserting your needs, which you should be.
Yes.
So I don't necessarily think that polarization is helpful to go to that end of the spectrum. However, I would say when we want to look at how to become more flexible, there are two main components for me. One is having faith, right? Which a lot of people don't. You know, it's having trust and faith in this process. It's really hard, but that is something that's deeply personal when it comes to having faith in every area of our lives, that what is laid out is meant for us. And seeing what we call curses as blessings and gifts, right? That's how we have to look at things.
It's a change of mind. It's like
a perspective shift.
That's what I was going to say. It's a whole perspective of let's look at it this way. And
it's a level of spirituality that a lot of people are resistant to for whatever reason, you know? So there's that, if you're asking me, which you are. And the other piece of that, for flexibility is looking at where our desire to control comes from. And that's going to require a level of inquiry that a lot of people are uncomfortable with accessing, because that does require us to look at our history, right? I'm not one to be stuck living in the past. However, it is helpful to look at certain experiences that we've had throughout childhood and, you know, growing up that cause us to really need control in order to feel safe. And that comes from, you know, being in an unstable environment in childhood, right? Did you have a parent who required caretaking? And did you have a parent who was emotionally volatile that required you as a child to be like, okay, like, I can't control how my parents are responding to me. I can't control the yelling. I can't control the physical abuse. I can't control the up and down schedule changing all the time. But what I can control is this tiny little world right in front of me, which is like, maybe I organize my toys and my clothes a certain way. Maybe I eat certain foods because this is what I have control over. And then that compounds and becomes a patterning in our adult life of like, well, if I don't control the time and the place and who my OB is and the nurse that's going to be there and the birth plan and the this, and then, you know, my hair and my clothes and my, you know, we become hyper controlling of everything because that's how we feel safe. Because as a child, that was the only way
our safe space.
We could access safety. So that's just one example. Because for me, holding on to that birth plan so rigidly is that there's a fear that if we lose control, we're not going to be safe.
Yeah, totally. And sometimes that's really hard to like process. Like, I have to let go of this and I'm going to be safe, and creating this safe space. How would you, so this is not necessarily specific to VBAC in general. This is just preparing. So you talk about, you do a lot. Obviously, I just read off like 10,000 caps that you wear, and there's caps that you wear that we don't even know about, right? Like, you have all these caps, I swear, that you wear, but like, in addition to processing and stuff like that, preparing physiological birth, we talked about it. Like, how can you prepare for that specifically? Or what tips would you give to really prepare for that and hone in on that?
So yeah, on like the physiological level, what I invite people to do is return to more like what I would call indigenous ways of moving. How we've moved before, how we moved as human beings before modern society and modern design. So what does that mean? It does not mean doing like a specialized pregnancy yoga or pregnancy Pilates program. It means like, how did we move before we had these specific things. We were squatting often. We were bending down to garden. We were resting in a squat. We were sitting in tailor pose. We were weaving, sitting in tailor pose for 2 hours. We were walking hands and knees. We were climbing things. So if we integrate all of those natural movements, which are very, very second nature for our body, that's the best physiological preparation for birth. Mm-hmm. There is no $5,000 program that's going to make your body ready. It's nothing like that. It's daily movement and resting actively. So I could sit in a chair, I could slump into the couch and rest, or I could rest in a squat against a wall. I could check my emails and rest. I could, scroll through my phone while I'm in a squat. Resting should be active, and that's going to open the pelvis. It's going to add elasticity to the perineum. It's going to make the woman's legs stronger and ready for being in what is the marathon of labor, right?
Yes.
So that's what I would say. We just don't move enough as a society. And you don't need to be doing high level cardio either. You don't need to go to the gym. You need to walk at least an hour every day and rest actively. So that's what I would say. And then the other part of the preparation is a lot of the more psychospiritual work that I talk about is owning where we feel fear and, say, okay, well, I want to feel safe. This is my birth plan. I need it to feel safe. Mm-hmm. Well, if you feel the need for that safety, it's because there's something about your birth environment or your birth team that doesn't feel good. Mm-hmm. So let's address that, because you shouldn't have to rely on a birth plan to feel safe. You shouldn't have to rely on a birth plan. You should be able to communicate the things that you want. And if you're trusting that your birth team is hearing you, you're not going to feel so attached to that plan. Follow it, right? You're not going to be controlling. You're going to be able to surrender. So we have to look at also at who is supporting us, and is this the right environment for me?
That just resonated with me so much, because with my second, I wanted this VBAC. I didn't have a doula. My husband wasn't on board. I had this feeling at 36 weeks I should change providers, but then I didn't, because I didn't want to, I didn't want to hurt his feelings, or I felt bad that I was leaving his care.
You were caretaking your doctor.
Yeah. So I had I was I would leave him, and he's been with me for 2 babies and, all these things. And I went to the same place that I knew deep down, but I didn't want to accept it, that it triggered me even just walking into my prenatal visits.
You went back to the scene of the crime.
Went back. Yes, I went back there, and I kept going back there, and I would feel it when I was there, and I would feel angst, and I would get more annoyed as I was waiting longer in the waiting room. And I never felt like that. I'm actually a very calm and chill, very lax, probably too lax person. And so, all of these things were signs and things happening. And then obviously I had a repeat cesarean, and I wasn't necessarily supported during that birth, and it happened, and I've worked through it and processed it. But with my third, I had a provider who is super supportive, super supportive. And everyone's like, yeah, you're totally going to have this feedback. Oh my gosh. And something didn't sit right. Something did not sit right. Every time I'd go in, I was like, I don't know. And I ended up leaving his care, a supportive provider, at 24 weeks. And I changed care. And exactly like what you just explained, I knew I wanted a VBAC. I knew I wanted that. But other than that, there was nothing set in my way during my labor with my third that I was like, I have to do this. I have to do this. It was like, I was just there, and I was in full trust of my entire team and that space. I felt that space held me, and that held me tight, and it held me warm. And I felt all the love and all the support and all the tingles along the way, because I truly, I mean, I don't want to give myself a cookie, but I nailed it with my birth team. I nailed it, right?
Give yourself that cookie.
Yeah. It took a long time for me to find it, but having that in that space, even when it was taking long, and there was question of what do we do? We've been doing this for a really long time, even then it was okay. It was
That's so beautiful.
And I love that. And I love that space, and I will cherish it forever. And I will say there were some things postpartum that happened that I was kind of not super loving. And that's more what I hold on to. Interesting enough, I hold on to that, and I still talk about this. and I probably still haven't processed this. And I probably might be that 60-year-old in my 60s talking about.
No, we'll process it one day.
My postpartum, and I think that processing is going to come to like knowing more. Just answering the questions that I have, right? And it wasn't bad. There were just some things I was like, what happened? Like, what was that? Yeah. But yeah, I think to what you're saying is getting that team, feeling that space where you might still have those desires of those birth preferences, but it's not even something you're focused on.
No,
you don't even question.
If there's any part of you that's like, this doesn't feel good, right? Like if you're sitting in that waiting room and you're like, I don't even like being in this waiting room. That's not just because waiting rooms suck. There are some waiting rooms I've sat in. I didn't even notice I was waiting. I felt good.
Yes.
I felt safe. I felt at ease. I want to invite women to stop gaslighting themselves and trust their intuition.
That just gave me the chills.
And just because all your friends birthed with that doctor or that midwife and they have great Yelp reviews, it does not mean that it works for you. And there is nothing wrong with you if you switch providers 4 times in your pregnancy until you find the right one. People spend more time shopping around for cars and test driving cars than they do the person who's going to hold space for their birth. It's kind of wild, right? So I really want to invite women to do that. Spend more time noticing how your body feels when you're in certain environments and with certain people who are going to be there for your birth. It might be the most amazing doula that everyone loves. And you meet her and you're like, I am not vibing. Like, is there something wrong with me that I'm not vibing with like the best doula that everyone recommends? No, you just don't vibe. And that's fine. You might vibe with the doula who's only done one birth and like doesn't have any reviews, but you just feel real safe with her, right? And that's where you need to walk toward. So yeah, the birth plan is helpful only because it's an exercise in learning about what goes down at a birth, but it's not because it's going to keep you safe from the unknowns, right? You need to feel safe with your team, right?
Absolutely.
The birth plan is not a contract. Just because you have one, it doesn't mean that everyone has to abide by the contract. It's just an opportunity for you and your partner to be like, oh, what's PKU? Oh, what's an epidural? Oh, what's Pitocin? That's where you can learn about this process. But I would just invite everyone to shop around with who's going to be at your birth. Do not caretake, right? Like, oh, my mom really wants to be there. It's like, that's okay. She wants to be there. But if you have a really charged relationship with your mother and it would actually stress you out for her to be there because she's an anxious woman, she's not supposed to be there, because the woman birthing is supposed to surrender. And how can we surrender to birth when we're taking care of everyone's feelings?
Yes. I mean, I can relate to that so much. My mom to this day, I don't know if she'll ever forgive me. Seriously, she holds this grudge against me that I didn't love her unconditionally enough to invite her into that space. But right there just goes to show, right? Like my mom, I love her. I love my mom. I do. She's not the person I wanted in my birth space, right? And I would have been that person. I would have been that person worrying about what she would have been thinking and her worries along the way,
right?
And hosting my mom. And so, sometimes those things are really, really hard. Those choices are really hard to make, but creating that birth space is going to be so powerful. And like you said, you can change many times. You can change during your labor. If someone comes in and they're not resonating with you and you're not feeling it and you're feeling contention, excuse them from the birth space. Ask your husband or your partner or your doula, someone else to play the bad guy and let them go. And that is okay. And when I went in to go get my op reports for my second, he looked at me, he laughed and he said, good luck. No one's going to want you out there. Right there. Why did I stay with a provider that treated me that way? Why didn't I follow my heart? Right? Why didn't I follow that heart? And, I was feeling good about my provider with my third. I was, but something didn't feel right. And I couldn't put a pointer on it, but it was more like, I think my provider is going to be restricted in the end. And he would have been restricted in the end. So I love that you mentioned that.
Isn't that amazing? That's like what the classic narcissist says when you try to leave them. It's like, good luck out there. No one else is going to want you. That's literally what a narcissist says to their, I don't want to say victim, right? Because no one's a victim and no one is a victim. Everyone has choice. right? And, even in a narcissistic relationship, the one who's quote unquote being abused is choosing to be there. They're the one who's choosing not to leave, but it's just interesting that we get into these dynamics with our medical providers. And it's not just OBs, it's midwives as well. I want everyone to get very clear on the reality that just because you're working with a midwife does not mean that it's not going to be a highly controlled, potentially conventional relationship and birth.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there are providers out there that are going to be right for you and not right for you. And I do it too. I encourage you, follow your heart. And like you said, check into it. If you're in that waiting room and your heart is racing and you're feeling anxious, I don't know. I mean, you got to tune into it. This is where, I speak a lot about intuition. And when Julie was with me, I mean, I swear we preach intuition, and it is hard sometimes to really dive in and figure that out. But, it's important. It's really important. It's going to tell you something. It's going to tell you something. And same thing with processing birth, right? Tune into that. What's hanging there? What is hanging there? And what are you talking about? First on, that's probably something that's triggering you. Of course.
Yeah. And this is also what I do. I lead doula trainings and mentorships. And so this is a lot of what we talk about in this mentorship is how to hold that space, right? It's not necessarily some of the women that do this training, it's not even to become a birth doula. It's just learning how to hold space for a woman and offer reflection when they're going through their process, or if they want to process something, postpartum. And in this training, I also require that the trainees do their own, amount of share of processing, right? Because we can't really be holding space for women unless we're also in a self-actualization process, So it's just learning to tune into the body and, again, not gaslight yourself, right?
Yeah, I love that. Oh, so many things. You have so many amazing things. So tell everybody so we've talked about your course, your trainings. Tell everybody where they can find you and find more information about everything that you offer.
Yeah. So my website is obviously the best place to get in touch with me. It's eylacuenca.com. And there's also uncoveringbirth.com. And that's where, you could go through the masterclass. Even if you're not pregnant, if you're a practitioner of any kind, you're a chiropractor or a friend of yours is giving birth and you just want to understand the arc of birth, right? How were we birthing? How have we arrived here? And I really feel everyone should understand their own birth. Even if you don't plan to have kids, understand how you came in, because the way that we're born, what we experienced in our mother's womb when she was pregnant with us, that influences, that creates the blueprint for our life. So a lot of unanswered questions you might have about your health, about your mental, spiritual state, those are things that you can uncover in understanding birth more clearly. Right. And so, I also have an Instagram. So I do a lot of interaction there. I like to answer questions on Instagram. I do a lot of health advocacy on Instagram. So I provide different types of forums for people who are going into hospital settings and want to make sure that they can keep their placenta, for example, and want to understand their rights with placenta. And so, I offer a lot of those resources through Instagram and through my website.
I love it. Awesome. And we'll make sure to have all of your information right here in the show notes in case you don't know how to spell Eyla Cuenca. Don't worry. It's right down there. And it is not A-Y-L-A, it's E-Y-L-A if you're looking on Instagram as well. So thank you so much, Eyla. It's been a pleasure. You are amazing. I can feel the passion coming through this Zoom. I really can. I feel like I need to come be your friend. I need to come.
Please.
You are amazing. And I'm so grateful for you. And I know so many people would take so many nuggets out of this episode and they're going to apply it in their journey.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me.
Would you like to be a guest on the podcast? Tell us about your experience at thevbaclink.com/share. For more information on all things VBAC, including online and in-person VBAC classes, the VBAC blog, and Julie and Meagan's bios, head over to thevbaclink.com. Congratulations on starting your journey of learning and discovery with the VBAC Link.